Hello everyone, welcome to Philosophy Roulette 41, where we grab a random paper off the internet of academic lovely philosophy and read it and review it, see what's going on. So we did this multi-location and parsimony. Thought it had some interesting things to say, but we're going to keep going on. We did colonizing the wrong colonialism the other day. See what we get. Cut-free approach and the admissibility of curry. That's a logic one, but I might actually just go read that. The role of judgment in Doxastic agency. Hey, why not? Let's talk about Doxastic agency. Let's see if it's here. David Jenkins, Tel Aviv. Okay, so we got it. Alrighty, so we've got so if you come by and watch this live one day, you can just grab the paper out of the link out of the chat. Yeah, that's about it. Why not? We'll do this one. Here we go. This is like super short, like 8 pages. Alright, that's impressive. You got yourself published with only 8 pages. It's the old paradox. If I had more time, I would have read it in a shorter letter. It's very impressive when you can, what is it, this one? Yeah. Okay. There we are. And, so. And we're not reading the abstract. I do not care. Just go directly into it. Says I'm not streaming, but it says I'm streaming. Interesting. Contradictory reports. I'm gonna assume I'm streaming, even though it says I have not spent any time streaming. Knowing how forgetful I am in the mornings, I'm worried about being late for a train. I might set my watch half an hour fast. By doing so, I bring it about that at 8 the next morning, I believe it is 8:30 a.m. I leave the house in good time as a result. What this illustrates is one way of bringing it about that I have certain beliefs. I can, that is, deliberately cause myself to have certain beliefs and thus exercise agency over them. Well, not entirely certain that you have those beliefs. You sort of have the reaction at certain times that, oh my god, it's later than it is. Do you actually believe it, or did you get like some sort of like knee-jerk reflex and that's really what you were going for? Okay. But we also take ourselves to have another more direct way of exercising agency over our beliefs. We take it that we can exercise doxastic agency by reasoning and judging. We take it that is, that we can actively make up our minds by reasoning and making judgments. Yeah, we change our minds about stuff. I agree. Understanding how doxastic agency is possible is a matter of considerable difficulty, however. After all, we cannot form beliefs at will. We can form some beliefs at will. We cannot form all beliefs at will. I can force myself to believe some weird things, but for a very short period of time, and then it sort of collapses. But that's a limited subset of like things that you can force yourself to believe. Like, it's like you think you're gonna grab like a glass like that's on the table, and you miss it, and you think you're gonna get it, and you can force yourself to think you're gonna get it, even if you're kind of uncertain one way or the other. So it's like there's some leeway here. But yeah, we cannot believe or come to believe that P voluntarily or intentionally, nor can we decide to do so. I disagree. I think there's some leeway on this one. But let's take it for the sake of argument that we can't. This way of believing P and forming the belief that P different raising to one arm and thinking about whether P. As Boyle notes, this observation suggests a challenge that defenders of the application of agental notions of belief must face. They must give a clear account of whether other notions of agency or control is at issue here? What other notion of agency or control is at issue here? Okay. If we really can exercise doxastic agency, the thought is it needs to be explained how this is so, despite the fact that we have neither belief nor form particular beliefs at will. Again, I'm not sure that this is the case, but I'd have to go see what the old argument for it was, or against it was. Boyle assumes that in order to do so, we must appeal to some other special kind of agency or control, that we must appeal to agency or control which is different in kind to that in question when one, say, raises one's arm. Yeah. Well, I agree that there's certain things I can't force myself to believe, but there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, and I can sort of force things maybe within a range of things I find uncertain to begin with, to believe one way or the other. So it's like I can't do like some sort of like hard like really hard things to believe, but like when there's already leeway, then maybe it's not so clear. Okay, but it is typical to think that appeal to judgment can contribute to an explanation of how it is that we can exercise doxastic agency. It is typical, that is, to endorse what I will call the standard view. Standard view. We can exercise doxastic agency because judging that P is a way of coming to believe that P. So judging is a method of coming to believe, or so a way to get to belief that P. So judging is some sort of like proxy to getting to belief. Judging is I'm not sure. I don't know. Alright, well, let's see what if they say anything about judging that P. I can, for instance, conclude deliberation on whether P by judging that P. Yeah, sure, you can deliberate on P. And doing so can yield a new belief that P. I don't know about that. I mean, there's a lot of things that I can judge that is the case, and then doing so somehow, I also, in judging that P, like, then I also believe it. Okay, maybe, depending on your definitions of, like, belief and judging and all that stuff. It's like, I can, I mean, if just by belief you mean the content of the result of my judgment, then it's like, yeah, well, in a fictional story, I believe that Sherlock Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street, sure, and I believe that. Did I judge that, and, like, that's how I got to believe, but it's still, like, a fictional belief, and it's like, well, there might be some, I mean, like, if you're just talking about the result of a judgment as yielding a belief, then that's fine, but that's a definitional move you made. That's not a, so I'm not sure if that's their equivalent there. Anyway, it is probably not that important. It is natural to think that we can exercise doxastic agency because we can make such judgments, and because such judgments can yield beliefs of some sort, sure. I'll grant it. I mean, like, some sort of belief. Saying I judged that P, for instance, would be a natural way for me to express that I take myself to have made my mind up about P. After the standard view alone, but the standard view alone does not yield an adequate response to Boyle's challenge. After all, we cannot judge at will any more than we can believe or come to believe at will. Maybe. I mean, we can avoid thinking about certain things and, like, therefore not believe certain things because we don't want to think about them. It's like we may kind of have an inkling that that person doesn't like me, but I'm going to ignore it because I think they're very pretty. And so it's like you can avoid the belief that they hate you because you avoid thinking about it, and then you don't judge. So you can avoid judging at will, and so yes, you can avoid this sort of thing if you might be delusional, but then the belief never comes into play because you didn't judge, but the judging can be avoided. Okay. I shall develop a version of the standard view that is not subject to Boyle's challenge. Cool. Understanding doxastic agency does not require any special notion of agency or control. We can see this if we place judgment in the context of making up our minds by reasoning. In contrast to judging, it seems unproblematic to say that reasoning can be a form of voluntary intentional action. Maybe this is what I was saying. When it amounts to making up our minds, reasoning constitutively concludes with judgment, and making such a judgment just is coming to believe something. Okay, so this is the definitional issue right here. Like, judgment just is coming to believe something. Like, that's, fine, but like, does belief then reduce to judgment in this case? I would say, I mean, it would seem a little bit odd if belief reduced to judgment, but you can also then define judgment as coming to have some sort of belief about something. Fine. I shall proceed as follows. In section 2, I consider what appears to be a common understanding of the standard view. It holds that judgment yields belief by causing it. I argue that causal versions of the standard view cannot accommodate our pre-theoretical conception of successful deliberation. In section 3, I therefore draw on Ryle for an alternative. According to the token identity view, I suggest judging is typically just is coming to believe. Fine. In section 4, I come back to Boyle's challenge and explain how the token identity view yields a way of conceiving Doxastic agency in a way that is not subject to the challenge. I finish in section 5 by considering Boyle's claim that the token identity view faces a fatal dilemma. Okay, the causal view. We can begin with some platitudes about judgment. Judgment is a conscious mental event or act. When I judge that P, this judgment might yield belief that P, but not always. For instance, judging that P does not yield belief that P when I already believe that P. Yeah, it doesn't yield it. It may still just be a confirmation of some sort. Many also think that in the absence of prior belief, judgment can fail to yield belief. Yeah, judging that something is the case doesn't always get up to the level of like whatever you think. Like, just depends on like what sort of judgment it was. Maybe you have a very high bar for what you believe, and so certain judgments can get you to like might be believing it, might make it reasonable, but you don't quite believe it yet. So it depends on how high your bar is for belief. Like even like, so if like belief is here and like knowledge is there, and but like there's like crappy beliefs down here, like maybe judgment only gets it to like the sort of like mediocre beliefs. So, whatever. Even if that is correct, we can still plausibly think of judgments as conscious acts of a kind that at least typically yield corresponding beliefs, unless we already hold those beliefs, but just how they play this role is not immediately clear. This is what must be understood first if we are to see how the standard view can accommodate doxastic agency. Many seem to assume that judgment yields belief by causing it. I don't know exactly how judgment causes things, but I mean, I can understand the position. But I'm just trying to think, like, what is the metaphysics of judgment that judgment implies causation? Whatever. More precisely, the idea seems to be this. When judgment yields belief, an event of judging P causes formation of a belief that P, that is, an event coming to believe that P, causes the causal view. Toribio appears to be endorsing the causal view when she states that judging is an event that very often leads to the formation of belief. As does Kassam when he says that judging that P normally leads one to believe that P. On the resultant understanding of the standard view, we can exercise doxastic agency because judgments typically cause corresponding beliefs unless we already hold those beliefs. Okay, so is this like a performative? Like in the performance of judgment, you lead, like that performance of doing the judging leads to belief? Or is there something else going on here? Judging is an event. See, it's like, this is what I'm getting at, like, this event talk right here. Is an event, like, so if you're performing something, you're making something happen, that very often leads to the formation of belief. So that'd be interesting, but like, there's something to be spelled out there, but I mean, it seems like a reasonable position to begin with. Okay. A worry for the causal view, and thus for the resultant understanding of the standard view, concerns whether it can accommodate our pre-theoretical conception of successful deliberation. Call this the aim of deliberation worry. Though not decisive, the worry is sufficiently serious to motivate looking for an alternative. But what is the worry? The aim of deliberation on whether P is at least typically to find out, and thus come to know whether P. So thinking about P is to try to understand P. Furthermore, when one concludes deliberation with judgment, one conceives of the act as amounting to the achievement of the aim of one's deliberation. Boyle expresses this very thought when he says that when I conclude deliberation with judgment, the act of judgment is the completion of my project, not a step towards it. Consider then a paradigm case of successful deliberation. I do not yet believe that P or not P. Deliberate about whether P and conclude by judging that P. I conceive of my judgment that P as amounting to my achieving the aim of my deliberation, and that aim is to come to know whether P or not P. I will thus only have achieved my aim if I conceive of it, if I know that, and thus believe that P when I judge that P. That's a wonderful sentence to read. On the current picture, however, when I conclude deliberation by judging that P, I do not yet believe P. I only do something which bring about the belief that I believe P, all being well. Which will bring about that I believe P all being well. What? I only do something which will bring it about that I believe P all... I don't understand this sentence, but it's fine. This sentence is not important. And whether I in fact go on to form belief is not settled by any act or action of mine. Well, this is what I was saying about the performative. It's in the performance of this other thing, which is the end of your task, that the belief gets formed. It's like you may have completed your task over here in judging P or not P, but the belief then gets fixed to the performance of that. I have no idea, but like it seems like that'd be a reasonable way out, as opposed to like this, the belief formation is some sort of hanger on when you're actually just trying to find out P or not P. Okay. Of course, when we conclude deliberation by judging, we may fail to achieve the aim of such deliberation in doing so. One might fail to come to know, and perhaps even fail to come to believe, what one judges. The aim of deliberation worry is not that the causal view allows that in concluding deliberation by judging one might fail to achieve the aim of one's deliberation in doing so. The worry is rather that if the causal view is correct, then judging cannot amount to achieving the aim of deliberation as we conceive it. If the causal view is correct, then whatever I conclude some typical deliberation with a judgment, I have not yet achieved the aim of my deliberation. I have rather merely taken a step towards doing so by doing something which will, all being well, bring it about that my aim is achieved. Yes, this is what I'm saying about the, you get it for free as being part as a performative, but, I mean, it's a good point. If the aim of deliberation is deciding something, and then you're talking about belief, then it looks like you've missed the target of the aim of deliberation. You're generally not aiming to create beliefs when you're thinking about stuff. It's like, oh, I'm going to go get a new belief now. No, I mean, that's why this is a good concern, because that makes no sense. No one actually says that. But the problem is you do just sort of get those for free when you go and decide stuff. You're like, oh wait, now I believe this because of all of these other things. So let's see what the alternative to the causal view is then. To develop an alternative to the causal view, and thus an alternative understanding of the standard view, I shall draw on a distinction from Ryle. Events can be given what Ryle calls a thicker or thinner descriptions. A is a thicker description of an event than B if and only if one A's by being. What? Okay, let's see. Take Ryle's example of someone's winking. To give a thin description of the end would be to call it a contraction of the eyelid. To give a thicker description would be to call it a winking. To give a thicker description still might be to call it a signaling conspiratorial to an accomplice. What was at the end of, I don't know if it's in the book, but was I, Robot? With the wink is to, it makes a big difference that the robot understands that a wink is a signal conspiratorial to an accomplice. It's like you understand a human thing that we do, and that somehow showed that Sonny, I think it was, the robot, actually was picking, like really did understand the human interaction. Okay. But good job, Philip K. Dick. There is just one event in question in question which can be given a thicker and thinner descriptions, a single event variously described. Okay, sure. There are multiple levels to basically everything. Similarly, when I judge that P, an event occurs which can be given a thicker and thinner descriptions. To give a thin description of the event would be to call it an accepting of P. To give it a thicker description would be to call it judging that P. To give a thicker description still might be calling it a concluding of a deliberation on whether P. Okay, fine. You can say all this stuff if you like. Crucially, when I judge that P, to give a thick description of the event may be to call it a coming to believe that P. I'm not sure they're of the same kind, the end of a deliberation and to come to believe something. But that's, I mean, if you want to define it in sort of this way, I don't think I don't think it's going to trouble. I don't know if they're of the same kind, but again, this one sort of seems like the par for this sort of paper. So maybe it's fine. Again, when such a description is correct, it is not the case that there are several events in question, say a concluding of a deliberation on whether P, a judging that P, and coming to believe that P. Just one event is in question which can be given a thicker and thinner descriptions. A single event occurs in which can be variously described as concluding a deliberation on P, as judging that P, and coming to believe that P. Fine. I mean, you're just going to sort of like this is just gradations on stuff. And you can say, well, coming to believe is a just very strong way of saying that you've concluded deliberations on whether P. Fair enough. That's okay. When a judgment yields a corresponding belief, the judgment is thus related to the resultant belief, as getting married is related to being married, and parking on a double yellow may be to being a lawbreaker. I mean, seriously? That's your example of law breaking? Like parking on a double yellow? Alright. Getting married does not cause a couple to be married, nor does parking on a double yellow cause one to be a lawbreaker. The event, which is the couples getting married, just is the event which is their coming to be married. An event which is one's parking on a double yellows may just be the event which is one's becoming a lawbreaker. Similarly, when I become to believe by judging the event which is my judging just is the event which is coming to believe. The judgment is related to the resultant belief, as the event O is coming into being relates to O for any O. I mean, this is fine. I just regard this as a definitional sort of thing. You're just calling this is belief as this sort of the end of judgment, which is fine. But, I mean, it's not really argued for. You gave some examples, which is okay. But it's not like it's a problem either. But I'm a little, maybe I'm grumpy today about argumentative styles. I was grumpy this morning about it, and I'm grumpy again about it, and I apologize to the author. It's really not a big deal. So this is the token identity view. I suggest, if I come to believe P by judging that P, my coming to believe P is simply the same event as my judging that P. Someone might object to the token identity view along the following lines. It is possible to judge that P without coming to believe that P. It is also possible to come to believe P without judging that P. These events have distinct modal profiles and therefore cannot be identical, but making this objection would amount to confusing events and event types and event tokens. The event types judging that P and coming to believe P are indeed not identical, but that does not mean that a token of the former cannot also be a token of the latter. Yeah. It's like they could actually line up depending on how you define your terms, and that's okay. Okay, so according to the standard view, this is the section for the reasoning view. According to the standard view, we can exercise doxastic agency because judging that P is a way of coming to believe that P. With the token identity view on the table, it can now be claimed that this is so, not because we can cause beliefs by judging, but because to judge can just be to come to believe. The aim of deliberation word does not arise for this suggestion. One can achieve the intuitive claim of deliberation about whether P, to come to know either P or not P, by judging that P, because to judge that P can just be to come to know that P. Furthermore, the suggestion makes way for a promising account of how we exercise doxastic agency. Okay. There are in fact two ways to develop the suggestion that we should combine the standard view and token identity view in order to explain how we can exercise doxastic agency. One way to go would be to say that we can exercise doxastic agency by judging, because judgment is a kind of action, albeit one we cannot perform at will. Again, e.g., alright, so you know what, maybe I should read, I'm actually a little concerned about this because I completely disagree with this statement. I mean, I think there's a bunch of leeway in here. So I'm sort of like, I think all of these people must be wrong, so maybe I have to do something about that. Doing so would yield the following proposal. Judgment is a kind of action, and to judge can just be to come to believe what one judges to be the case. To judge can therefore just be to exercise doxastic agency. In response to this proposal, some will doubt that judgment is a kind of action. Alright. Yeah, I can see why someone might say that. More crucially, to endorse this proposal is to insist that judgment is a kind of action, despite that we cannot judge at will any more than we can believe or come to believe at will. It is thus to believe to a special kind of agency in order to explain how we can exercise doxastic agency in the face of Boyle's challenge. But to do this is not to meet Boyle's challenge unless it is explained how judgment is action, despite that we cannot judge at will. It is no explanation of how we can exercise doxastic agency despite the fact that we cannot believe or come to believe at will, to say that we can do so by judging, whilst admitting that we cannot judge at will. How judgment is action nonetheless must also be explained. Yeah. So, if you make that assumption, then it mucks up a lot of Boyle's argument, apparently. Okay. There is a simpler route available. The standard view and token identity view can be combined to yield an account of how we can exercise doxastic agency without insisting that judgment is action, and thus without having to explain how judgments are actions. I will label this proposal the reasoning view. In bringing out the reasoning view, we can begin with the following observation. Even granting judgments are not actions, they can be constituents of reasoning. So is reasoning not an action then? Judgments, that is, can occur as constituents of processes of reasoning. Yeah, see, reasoning is a process. Like, what is this word doing here then? Processes. I might, for instance, judge that Q, suppose that R, and finally judge that Q, suppose that R, and finally infer P, judging that P, and thus concluding that P by doing so. When I judge that P in this context, my doing so is a constituent of my reasoning. Furthermore, given token identity view, this judgment may just be an event of my coming to believe P. Finally, in contrast to judging, it seems unproblematic to say that reasoning is a form of voluntary intentional action. Okay, so now we are finally getting to why judging is not an act, because what I was thinking of judging is what this person is calling reasoning. And so judging is involuntary then, I guess. The involuntary result of reasoning. So I was thinking of proximal stuff as the parts of the judgment, but that's really reasoning under this view. And judging is just the final bit of the reasoning. Just like, okay, therefore P. And that's not an action. You're just being like, okay, well now we have P. Maybe. We can reason intentionally and voluntarily, and reasoning is the kind of thing which we can decide to do. It can be maintained that reasoning, unlike judgment, is a kind of ordinary action. Okay, so maybe this is where my complaint was from earlier. It's not that we judge on purpose, but that we reason on purpose, or we can, and therefore it's just the last little bit. The last mile, the last step of the reasoning is involuntary in some sense. You just end up with the conclusion if, like, apparently all the logic just works out the way you hope it does or expect it does or it's supposed to work, and then that is involuntary. Okay. The reasoning view is then as follows. Reasoning as a kind of ordinary action is also a process which can have judgments as constituents. Furthermore, such judgments can just be events of coming to believe. Reasoning can thus be action where to reason can in part just be come to believe. Given this, to reason can in part just be to exercise doxastic agency. We can actively make up our minds by reasoning because reasoning is a kind of action, and because to reason can in part just be to make up one's mind. Okay. So we have extended judging into something reasoning. We have not explained reasoning, of course, but whatever it is, it's not judging, which we've already understood to be under our control. But reasoning as some extended process is. We don't know quite what reason or judgment is, but we're going to call this one ordinary, and this is okay. Okay. There is no commitment to the claim that judgments are actions on this proposal. We can exercise doxastic agency by reasoning, despite that judgment is not a kind of action, because reasoning nonetheless is a kind of action. I mean, it's like, sort of like a defining yourself out of the problem here. On this suggestion, reasoning is action despite it being the case that events which are constituents of the process are not themselves actions. See, this is just separating out all the stuff that you want, and all the stuff that you want not to be actions, and it just perfectly breaks off. Like, the reasoning stuff is all the stuff we want to control, and the other stuff is all the judgments, and then we're okay then. Analogously, when I play a fast and complex phrase on the piano, an action is in question. Despite this, it might be denied that some finger movements which are constituent events of this action are themselves actions. When I say play an A with my ring finger, this event might not be intentional under any description, nor something I decide to do or do voluntarily, and we might deny that this is an action accordingly. Alright, so yes, in an argument or in a reasoning process, there are parts that are not voluntary. The availability of the reasoning view that we do not need to say that judgment is a kind of action that we cannot perform at will in order to explain how we exercise Doxastic agency in accordance with the standard view. We can exercise it by reasoning because reasoning is a kind of action, because reason can in part just be to come to believe. Crucially, Boyles challenge. Well, see, I would just be it. No, it can eventually just be that, but I don't think reasoning the whole thing. If you were saying earlier that it was just the judgment is just to be, then you're expanding it to reason. Okay, maybe, but it seems like you're making it bigger and bigger what it comes to be to just believe. That just worries me, but that it's not really a critical issue. Okay. Crucially, Boyles' challenge simply does not arise for the reasoning view. There is no need to appeal to some special kind of agency in order to explain how we can exercise Doxastic agency. We can do so by reasoning, where reasoning is a kind of ordinary action. Again, this was not argued for. This was just sort of defined that we understand reasoning to be such an ordinary action. It is because reasoning is a kind of ordinary action that we can exercise Doxastic agency, despite that we cannot believe or come to believe or judge at will. Now this seems problematic because reason can in part just be to come to believe. So reason can in part just be to come to believe, and then we can, despite the fact that we cannot believe, come to believe, or judge. And then we've got this part down here that it's like this just whole, like this thing right here, this whole big, this one here, because a reason kind of ordinary action that we can exercise. Alright, that was terrible. I'm sorry about my circling. Let me highlight. Yeah, I need a secondary color for a highlight. Because if reason can be just to come to believe, but reason is voluntary, and despite that we cannot believe, come to believe, or judge at will, but like this is, if this is just to come to believe, then it seems like this sentence down here is contrary to this sentence up here. So I'm a little I mean, want to slice it so that like the reasoning part is the voluntary part and the like coming to believe part is like separate. But I mean, because to reason can be in part, see, in part I guess is the critical, super important bit of this, just be to come to believe. But if it is just to believe, then it seems like it's at will, because that was the at will bit. Like, yeah. Okay, so this is maybe this is a more substantial gripe in my part, because I don't think we've completely explained the difference between reason, judgment, and belief. It's been too unclear to me, at least. Anywho, Boyles Dilemma. Boyle 09 argues that judgments cannot be events of coming to believe, and thus against the token identity view. The token identity view is a crucial component of the reasoning view. It is needed if the reasoning view is to evade the aim of deliberation worry. Suppose I come to believe P by judging that P. According to the token identity view, the event which is my judging that P is identical to the event which is my coming to believe that P. Not P, just coming to believe P. According to Boyle, a dilemma arises for the suggestion when we ask, at the time at which I judge that P, do I believe that P? He argues as follows. If the subject does believe P at the moment when he judges P, or throughout the duration of the event if that takes time, then it seems that his judging is not an event of making up his mind or forming the belief that P, for even at the first moment of its taking place, he already believes the proposition in question. Yeah. If we suppose that when I judge that P, I believe P, proclaims that I already believe P when I make this judgment. Therefore, I cannot be forming the belief by judging. Suppose instead that I do not believe P when I judge that P. In that case, the event which is my judging is not itself the event of my forming the belief that P, for no such belief exists yet. At best on this view, my judgment that P can cause a later belief that P, but that is just the causal view, the view which I am trying to provide an alternative view. Okay. Boyles' dilemma is an instance of a general dilemma. Suppose we think that the event E is the event O's coming into being. We can then ask, does O exist at the time of E's occurrence? If the answer is yes, then E is not really an event of O's coming into being, since O already exists. If the answer is no, then E is again not an event of O's coming into being, since O does not yet exist. E can at best be O's coming in, can at best cause O's coming into being. For any event E, E cannot be the event of O's coming into being. To see what has gone wrong, it will be instructive to consider another instance of the general dilemma. Suppose I am granted such authority that I can fire you simply by saying you're fired. When I do this, I do not cause you to be fired. My saying you're fired rather makes it the case that you are fired. The event which is my saying you're fired just is the event which is you're becoming jobless. A version of Boyles' dilemma arises for this suggestion. Suppose that we ask of the event of my saying you're fired, are you jobless when I say this or not? If the answer is yes, then you are already jobless and I have not really fired you. If the answer is no, then again I have not really fired you. The event which is my saying you're fired can best cause some future event which is your becoming fired. On inspection, it can be seen that the first horn of this alleged dilemma trades on a mistake. It can be maintained that my saying you're fired does make it the case that you are fired and that you are thereby jobless when I say this. But that does not mean you are already fired when I say you're fired. You are fired when I say this, not before. For you are to be already fired when I say you're fired. For you to be already fired when I say you're fired would require you to be fired at some time prior when I say it, which is not the case. An analogous response is available to Boyles' dilemma. Suppose I judge that P and come to believe P by doing so. The event which is my judging that P is token identical to the event which is my coming to believe that P. We can coming to believe P. I keep adding extra that's, I apologize. We can then ask, when I judge that P, do I believe that P? The answer is yes. This does not entail that I already believe that P when I judge a P, just as the fact that you are fired when I say you're fired does not entail that you are already fired when I say this. For me to already believe P when I judge that P would be for me to have temporarily prior belief that P, which I do not in the case in question. Boyles' dilemma does not arise for the token identity view. Yeah, this is because, remember, it was sort of defined that when you come to believe, that is the creation of the belief at that moment, or so you do not that it just is that thing, so you do not have to worry about it the prior happening or that it causes something else, because in saying it, it's a performative. It, in some sense, it creates itself by doing the thing that it is doing. It creates itself, like saying when I say you're married, you are married. By me saying you're married, granted that we live in some place where that is the way the legal system is set up, where I'm in a position, like I'm a judge or something, and I say you're married, that makes you married. It's not that it causes something to happen, it is that I said so. And so when they say you're fired, that is not that it causes it to happen, it is that is the thing, that is the token of the thing that does it. Okay, but again, if you set up the world that way, this does work. Like I said earlier, that's okay. Yeah, it's okay. We began with this challenge from Boyles to give a clear account of what other notion of agency or control is at issue when we exercise doxastic agency. In response, I have suggested that reasoning is a kind of action. We can, after all, reason intentionally and voluntarily, and come to decide to do so. Furthermore, to reason can, in part, just be to come to believe. On this suggestion, when we make up our minds by reasoning, we can say that The kind of agency in question is ordinary action. There is no need to appeal to some other notion of agency. Okay. I think the more serious problem was when I was drawing too much on this thing up here. Other than that, if you want to start defining stuff in terms of each other, that's like okay. Again, I am unclear of the exact distinction between reasoning and judgment. I'm sure that like judging is like judging that P is some sort of like miraculous thing in this thing, which is not voluntary, but then reasoning that leads to the judgment that P somehow is voluntary, but I'm not maybe it's just my deficiency not understanding the exact distinction between the reasoning and the judgment. But that's okay. So if you're gonna I'd just like to be a little bit more clarified about that. But this sort of, if you are allowed to just get your beliefs along with your judging, then I think what was said here is reasonable. I don't know if it's incontrovertible. I suspect, just because of some of my concerns up in this area, that will be a response of some sort where we're trying to, because judgment is just coming to believe something. I'm not exactly sure what coming to, like how this just is exactly functioning. Why should we what is the exact like process? I mean, just accepting that judgment is belief, that just is something, which is okay, but I mean, it seems like there might be people might get a little might not agree on that, and then there'd have to be some sort of figuring out the details of what it just means for judgment just be a belief. But other than that, this was a nice essay in that it's an interesting use of slicing up judgment, reasoning, belief. The relationship between belief and agency is why I was like happy to read it, and I think it actually does do a good job on talking about that. So thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Give me any suggestions you want here, like papers you want me to read, or anything else about stuff in just the presentation, all that stuff. Be safe and have a good night, y'all.